Well, hello everyone. You have right here. I'm talking about for what is pay for it right here, and so it sure seems that way. That when we do think about paid for right here, what exactly does that mean necessarily? And like everybody else might even say that, well, it really means is toward it that no payments. I'm like, oh yeah, that you're like yeah, a bill is already it's already you're paid for, but you just got it. I'm like, oh yeah, so the way I have this written right here is toward it, you're just making sure that everything is all correct right here. And so, like, let's just say that I'm sure, most of us have been those times toward it that, like, really, what does paid for pretty much mean right here? And most of the time, it's like, yeah, it's like, yeah, talking about that for correct. And I can just use this right here as an example just because of the fact that a number of times that we've heard it and then based on for what we experienced, right? And a lot of times it sure seems that way that every time we do think about that and want to know that I'm like, yeah. So it's like whenever you're going to be looking at these documents, especially, and want to know too that why do you think that you would want to stamp these wordings and sayings onto a bill, right? So, like, let's just say if you do get a bill and a 102 that, okay, would it make more sense to go ahead and with that bill right there, that you go ahead and come up with a few, like, yeah, word problems. And so every time we think about a bill, though, and you're thinking is toward, okay, yeah, that whenever you think about a bill, though, that you see all those amounts that all rounded up, and plus the service that was received and all that. So, like, let's just say that when we do think about our bills most of the time, that it's like, yeah, you're going to be thinking about those most of the time is toward it, yeah, they don't look very pretty too much of the time most of the time that you don't really look forward to getting them too much of the time. But it's like, yeah, you go ahead and put it in the file or put it somewhere where you'll be able to have access to the information, right? And so it's like, yeah. So most of the time, whenever you do get a bill, it's based on information that's received, right? So a lot of times it's like, yeah, based on what had to be taken care of and other things that come to your attention as well. But do we look at this as we're talking about for paid for right here? So I'm sure most of us would say as to where how many of us had that experience to where that whenever a bill is paid for, that means is to where that yeah, it should already be taken care of. But all you have to do is just making sure that everything is all updated. Everything is updated and correct right here. So every time we think about that in 102, that yeah, you look at a bill and then you're thinking as toward okay, yeah, that was that a part of the agreement and then anything that you talked about during that meeting right there. So every time we think about that in 102, that yeah, well, really, what is up with this? This $35 right here, and what's up with this $49.99 right here? So let's just say that if we're going to be talking about any sorts of bills or any source of information, right, that contains about that when it talks about expenses, right? And so you're thinking as toward, okay, yeah, that so it paid in full, and I know that a lot of insurance companies too, and like all the other, like yeah, whenever you do talk about bills in a meeting, that you're thinking as toward, okay, yeah, paid in full or something like that, the full payment of $499.99 right here. So every time we do think about putting this into like any source of word problem, and 102 that yeah, based on an agreement, right? For special attention. So it's like yeah, so you would really want to explain how you came up with this scenario, and then all knowing about how it's going to be taken care of. Number one. So a lot of times it's like yeah, well really, if you were to actually show anybody a bill, right? It's like you have right here of like you have this form right here to explain about how much something was, and then knowing about like yeah that the services that were received. So every time you think about a bill almost all the time that you're thinking about is as to where, okay, yeah, not everybody looks forward to reading those, and so that's why it sure seems that way, that you really want to go ahead and put that in your own perspective as to where, okay, yeah, that, every time you look at a bill that you want to think about is as to where you don't really want to think about too much of the fact that, for what all the amounts that were charged onto a bill, but still that, but have we ever thought about that to where each time we think about a bill, though, that you want to kind of get an idea about what was the services that was received, and also so I have right here talk about for bills, and so I have right here talk about for information that was needed based on the services that was received and based on decisions that were made and in the statements that were working. So it's like so each time we think about a bill and want to know is toward okay, yeah, that so if you were to receive a bill and let's just say that those bills are going to contain information based on the work in progress, and then also about for how much like yeah, for if there was anything that needed to be verified, and maybe if everything looks correct right here. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, that so every time you do think about a bill, most of the time it's like, yeah, well, really, it's like the first thing that you think about is I talk about for information knowledge right here, to where that yeah, it's all about money, right? It's not really about the fact about okay, yeah, how is it paid for and who's paying for it, and knowing about I'm like, yeah, so every time we do think about that, and at the time it sure seems that way, that really what is so interesting about that. And let's just say that if we were to go ahead and put that into a perspective right here toward it, yeah, paid in full right here, the full payment right here. So like all the other senior citizens and anybody else who may want to were that yeah, so every time we think about bills most of the time, and want to know too that the yeah, you go ahead and put this, I'm like, yeah, so just showing everybody, I'm like, yeah, talk about for paid in full right here. So if I were to actually yeah, for special attention right here, so if I were to actually put this into like any sort of perspective, right, and 102 that yeah, you're just trying to put this so that we can see it right here, but I can go ahead and just yeah, like that right there, so we can see that. But you have right here talking about for paid in full right here, and I'm like, I see, I can maybe move that right up here so that we can see that right there, and go ahead and change this here, and then put that sideways. So each time we think about that and want to know, yeah, go ahead and just move it up here so that we can see that right there. So it's like, yeah, so every time we think about this and want to know too is toward it, yeah, most of the time it's going to involve your money. And that is why it sure seems that way, that every time we think about that and want to know too that, yeah, paid in full for 40, yeah, for $49.99 right there. And so like, let's just say that that every time we do think about a bill like that right there, and if you were to put 99 right there, and like anybody says toward it, yeah, well, really, that number one, whenever you do think about a bill, most of the time that you're thinking about is toward it, okay, yeah, if that's really upon the agreement toward it, if you were paid to, if you agree to pay that much, or if you want to go ahead and make a payment, right? So a lot of times it's like, yeah, make a monthly payment or 3 monthly payments or something like that. So usually that's usually how most applications work, though. And like we might even say too that yeah, well, really that most yeah, credit companies and all that for the most part that every time we think about that in 102 that if you're going to be making a payment on any source of bill, really, that payment amount is going to be less or greater than full. And like say that yeah, well, really, if it's not on the application right here, but let's just say that 3 easy payments, To me, though, I'm like, yeah, 3 easy payments. What does that mean necessarily? 3 easy steps, 3 easy payments. So, like, let's just say that if you agree to pay a bill, right, and let's just say that if you just made a payment of, of maybe $40 or something like that. So, if you would actually put this into a scenario right here, and want to know, like everybody else would even say too, that whenever it comes to bills, right, and thinking as toward, okay, yeah, that most of the time, how often do most of them get are taken care of already? And let's just say that, does that all go by as toward that you start from a smaller amount and work your way up, right? So every time you think about that in 102, that yeah, you go ahead and start with a smaller amount. You start smaller and you work your way up. And a lot of times it seems like as toward, okay, yeah, that they usually that when we do think about a bill most of the time, that you start smaller. You start with a smaller amount, then you work your way up. And so it's like, yeah, so every time you think about that and thinking is toward, okay, yeah, you make a payment, but then within about maybe 3 days later, you make an additional payment. 3 easy steps right here, and so that's why it sure seems that way. You got payment arrangements and all that. But it sure seems that way that every time we do think about bills most of the time, and let's just say that, 3 easy payments right here of, and like, 13, not 13.19 or something like that. $13, 13.19. And how many of us would even say too that, most your credit companies for sure would say that, how many their customers and clients would even say too that, yeah, that so every time we think about that, and every time we think about, I'm like, yeah, well, really, does that only apply to the seniors, or maybe does that really apply to those who are able to figure it out, to where, okay, yeah, that now the bill is this much right here. So how many of us would maybe agree to pay a bill that's only $13.19 right here? How many of us would agree to pay just that much? And for any source, I'm like, yeah, any source of agreement, though, how many of us would agree to pay the bill, for $13.19? And like I say that, yeah, well, you were originally told that it was $4.99.99 just right up here, but which one is it right here? So, like, let's just say that if you were to make a payment right here of $13.19, but then let's just say that if you were to make a payment within a certain time, like let's just say if it's within about maybe 5 days or so, you make a payment, and 5 days later you make an additional payment. So, like, let's just say it's all measured, it's all calculated per month and, of course, per weekly basis, right? So, like, so if we were to actually do the math right here and want to know too that is it really about now or later a payment, or is it really about the fact about, okay, yeah, that whenever a payment is received, but then the next payment, if you go ahead and schedule your next payment, right? So every time we do think about that on a calculator, and want to know too that you can paid for really be measured about the fact about there's a payment plan arranged. So a lot of times it's like, yeah, to where how many of us would have maybe agreed toward it? Yeah, the payment plan is toward it. We come up to an agreement to where that each one of us would agree to pay, like, yeah, their half, their fair share. But still, that what exactly is it that you're thinking about? And so every time we think about that, talk about for paid for right here, that does not mean free. That just means is toward that you're having a meeting about that, talking about, for what you're willing to agree to pay on top of. I'm like, so yeah, so it's like, to me though, if we would actually have a meeting about this and want to know too that, really, why would you want to use free whenever that don't really explain the whole story? They don't really explain the whole story compared to, like everybody else might say that if you were to explain those amounts and then maybe explain about whenever we're talking about most bills, so whenever we're talking about most bills, that that what you're talking about is to where that number one, though, that what is the top agenda here about what is what we're talking about right here is to where that yeah, that there's progress being made, right? So like let's just say that if all this writing right here is supposed to be calculated about the progress that was made, right? So if one of us were to read all this information right here, and let's just say if it's going to be saying as to where yeah, we took care of this and we took care of that top agenda right there, but it sure seems that way that if we were to actually build an agenda on this document right here, and if we were to stamp paid for right here, and like everybody else might say is toward it, yeah, that this right here is paid for, but then maybe after maybe 8 weeks, I'm like, yeah, if we can actually see progress made. So it sure seems that way that every time we think about a bill, though, that not everybody likes looking at all those amounts right there and then having to pay it, but let's just say that if we were to think about that right there, to where that for 1319, and so like for payment arrangements, right? So a lot of times it's like so every time we think about that, and 102 is toward yeah that go ahead and just somebody in that meeting room to go ahead and write this information down, and somebody to go ahead and update that on the bill, and somebody somebody in that meeting room just to go ahead and explain okay what all that you came up with right here on the bill. So it sure seems that way that you're working with like maybe 5 other people, or maybe 10 or maybe 20 other members of the group, and or meeting, or anywhere else that you're going to be talking about stuff like that. And 102 that I talk about for paid for, right? So every time we think about paid for, and then if you were to go back to page 4 and 5 right here, talking about for graduated, right? For the seniors, and but I'll go ahead and go right here. Yeah, 4, 5, and I think this is 3 and 2 right up above. Talk about for speak up, for next and new right here. But then talking about for the seniors, the senior discounts right here. So if we can all see that right there. And a lot of times it's like, yeah, that so if we're going to be talking about any sorts of advertising, right? Talking about for speak up right here, and so it's like, yeah, so if we're talking about any sorts of advertising, right? Ticket moving forward right here. What exactly was paid for? So if you would actually put all these pages together right here, it sure seems that way that, okay, yeah, that makes a little bit more sense right there. So it's like, yeah, so it's like, so every time we think about bills most of the time, it sure seems that way that, you really had to explain, I guess, about what you put together just to be able to tell them, like, yeah, in a meeting, just for them to really understand, okay, yeah, that's fine, and okay, so, so really, that, so when we do think about a bill most of the time, though, that are we necessarily thinking about, money all the time, or are we necessarily thinking about as toward it, okay, yeah, you go ahead and pay your half, or something like that, or yeah, pay it in full right here. So it sure seems that way that every time we do speak about paid for right here, and 102 is to where that does not really mean that it's free, right? That just pretty much means is to where that there's progress that was made. And I'll go ahead and put right here, yeah, progress was made. So every time we think about that, and 102 that, yeah, progress was made. So every time we think about that, and I'll go ahead and put that right there in a different color right here too, so that way we can see that. Different color, and 102 that that every time we think about this, and 102 that yeah, progress has been made. And every time we think about that, you're warned to where, yeah, if progress has been made. So every time we think about that, and want to know that, yeah, that every time we think about that, yeah, go ahead and maybe pink or green. Go ahead and put that in green. progress has been made right here. So if I were to put that in green right here and maybe put that on the front right there, progress has been made, paid for. So if you were to actually stamp that onto a bill, and everybody else might say that, really that, so if you were to actually stamp that onto a bill, then do you think necessarily toward, okay, yeah, well, what exactly does that mean necessarily? Well, it means is toward that, there's been progress that was made based on the work, based on decisions and all. So it's like, so every time we do think about that and thinking as toward, okay, yeah, that every time you do think about all this stuff right here and want to know that yeah, I'll go ahead and move this right down here so that way if we can all see that right there. I'm like, yeah, can we all see that? Unless if you want to go ahead and just change that to black right there. I can change it to black. Right there, yeah. So that way we can all see that right there. Yeah, progress has been made. So every time I think about that and want to know too yeah, think about that way. Progress has been made, even though the uh, the bill originally would have said something like 49. I'm like, yeah, the bill is would have been $499.99, but then if it was paid in full, but then if you made a payment of $13.19 right here, so it sure seems that way that every time I think about something like that, why do we necessarily think about that? Is to where maybe if that's like maybe a tax code or something like that, and like everybody else might even say that really that if that's supposed to be like any sort of agreement or any sort of tax code or something like that. So every time we think about that, and we're want to know too that why are we scrambling all these words all onto one document right here and thinking expecting for anybody really to understand what all that is and what all that's supposed to mean right there. So if we would actually do our homework on 102, that why do you think that you wouldn't want to put all these words onto a bill? Like if you would actually put the word if you would actually put the bill I'm like, yeah, if you were to put the estimate in your own words, like if you were to come up with your own estimate and come up with a scenario to where you go ahead and produce a bill in your own scenario, right, in your own words, and a 102 is toward it. Yeah, well, if everybody's able to agree on what you mentioned earlier, is as to where if you agree to pay $35, but then $1.50 for the kit, and then also for the like yeah. So if we're talking about maybe if it's a dental, or maybe if it's medical bills, or maybe if it's maybe even for the electric bill, or maybe for a car payment or something like that. Maybe for insurance, that it could be really any bill, really. And so, like, let's just say that if you were to, all you really have to do is just explain about is toward, okay, yeah, you're going to go ahead and pay the bill, right? But then today you're going to go ahead and pay with a credit card, but then by Friday you'll go ahead and pay with a check, right? So, like, a lot of times it seems like that every time we speak about negotiation, right? And a lot of times it's like, do we really find that to be real interesting, knowing that, okay, yeah, you went and paid with a check or money order last time, but then this time you're willing, you agree to make your payment with a Visa or with a MasterCard or something like that, or with a gift card. So it sure seems that way that, yeah, payment methods especially. So every time we do think about that in 102, that do bills and are bills paid much faster whenever you do have different selections of payment methods, and a lot of times that's usually what I see too, is that every time you think about that and you're warned to that this bill right here tends to shrink. It could tend it does start updating, right? So like every time you think about that, okay, yeah, it was a Monday the last time you were checking this status, but then whenever you check on Friday, Friday afternoon, and now the bill is this much. So every time you think about that in year 102, that if you were to put this into any sort of a word problem, such as a first scenario, right? And your word to where that the bill did not say for $499.99, but the bill, there was actually a credit. There was actually a credit you made on this bill right here. So there's been credits added to this bill. So every time we think about that in 102, that is that really a good example of paid for? Do we want to look at that as toward this right here, it's paid for already. And so if you want to look at that as another example of what exactly does pay for mean, is toward you go ahead and pay on a Monday, but then after 5 days later, then you won't have to pay anything at all the next time. Or do we want to look at that as toward paying your dues? Or do you want to look at that as progress that was made? Or like everybody else might say, is toward, special attention number one. So if we were to actually pick one of those categories, and like everybody else would say, that if we're talking about for senior citizens, right? But it's like every time we think about that, 102, that, really, why can't you put all this stuff right here on the discussion board right here to where, progress has been made. And I'll go in and copy this right here, copy this and make this smaller right here, because I know everybody else might say that, really, that if it wasn't on the discussion board already, that it needs to be on the discussion board. So go ahead and copy that and then paste that right here. And say that, it needs to be on the discussion board right here to where that everybody else can read that right there. So it's like, so every time we think about that, and 102, that, So if you're going to be looking at the chalkboard a lot of times, and people might say that, looking at the chalkboard just like that, and 102, that progress has been made right there. And so every time we think about that, and 102, that, that every time we think about, going to the meeting a lot of times, the things that you were talking about, let's just say that, all in a row, 5 days, 5 days in a row, and a lot of times that, like everybody else might say that you want to go ahead and use that, 5 days in a row. In a row. 5 days in a row right here. And I know like everybody else might say that, so if you were to use 5 days in a row right there, and, 5 in a row. 5 days in a row, and that's progress right there. Really, whenever you were first working on this job right here, that you actually thought that, 5 days in a row. So it's like you actually found a lot more progress being made during, maybe during the first 5 hours that you see, like everybody else, whenever you first start working on something, that you say something like, this is going to take, 8 weeks, or, this is going to take 2 weeks. But let's just say that for any job that you're going to be working, that are you really going to be looking for goals and achievements like this to where it says, 5 days in a row, to where okay, I was not expecting that, or, that surprises me with that. So it's like, so every time we think about that, and 102, that, so if you say 5 days in a row right here, so if there's been, one payment, and let's just say that, like everybody else might say, is toward it, progress has been made, and knowing about 5 days in a row right here. So if you would actually put this into like any sort of scenario, right? So every time you think about that, and 102, that, did that really come by surprise right here? And so every time you think about that, at 102, that, 5 days in a row, and progress that was made. So really, what does all this stuff right here really mean? So like, let's just say if you're going to be having a meeting about that, and everybody else might say that, if you stamped right here, paid for right here, progress has been made, then maybe everybody would see and realize that, okay, yeah, that everything is also totally different than compared to, from the very beginning, from the very beginning, and they can actually see and realize all the work that was made, right? So it's like every time you think about that, and want to know too that whenever you first start working a job, that there's a lot of things that you just don't know about, right? And that's why it sure seems that way. That do you really want to go and give somebody a clue or an estimate, really about okay, what's going on, and then knowing about what has been taken care of already. So a lot of stuff right here kind of sounds like just a little bit like a word problem, and like everybody else might say, is to where that if you're trying to solve a problem, and if you're just trying to come up with like a conclusion here about how to take care of a bill, like right, and so that's why it sure seems that way, that the ticket moving forward right here, and so it's like every time you do think about that in 102, that talk about for for graduate right here, and so it's like so it's like you have right here talk about for progress being made right here, and like everybody else might say that you put all this information right here, right? But then let's just say that if somebody were to ask you to please send me a copy of that so I can determine the eligibility, right? So it's like copies. So if that's really all you had to do right there, is just send a copy to a client right here. So like I think I mentioned before about that, and I know like everybody else might say that that based on the work that you were doing, that everybody else might say that that you would like to receive a copy of that, and Roger that or something like that. Anything else, but still. So it's like so every time we think about that in 102, that so every time we think about getting the job done, a lot of times you're thinking as to what it really, all you really have to do is show the copies of showing something like so it's like so just for verification purposes and all that, but to me though, like everybody else might say, that you're putting all these words together all right here, and that it's really going to be hard to read, and so that is why it sure seems that way. That like everybody else might say, that well, really, that not on the bill, but go ahead and so that way we can all see that right there. So it's like so every time you think about that in 102, you're going to be having a meeting talking about something. And 102, that it's important to have a separate copy of one for verification, one just for updating reasons, and so every time we think about that in 102, I remember talking about that during the meeting, but then you're gonna maybe have on the front of the document right here that you're gonna have it stamped, such as for copies or maybe verified, and so every time you think about that, and you're always want to know too that copies though, and want to know too if that's really all what you have to do, or for any reason at all, that that whenever you do get a bill, and whenever you do work on something though, that it's like you're putting together something, right? You're putting together the information right here, but then of course not everybody is going to see that. Not everybody's going to see and realize that. And so, like everybody else might say, is toward it, do you want to look at that? It's kind of like you're producing your own footprints, producing your own fingerprints, and like everybody else might say that, for most, for most of the time with graphic design and all that, and people might say, do you want to go and call it producing your own fingerprints and producing your own footprints, just because that you were able to come up with this conclusion right here, just to be able to take care of a bill. And let's just say that your communication, and also about talking to the experts, and but then having a meeting about it, and So like, let's just say that, yeah, 5 days in a row, and let's just say that if we were to use, like, if you were to make a payment, a full payment, or if anything, that you go ahead and you go and write down the notes, and then maybe write down the achievements and all that. So it's like, yeah, like everybody else might say, yeah, teamwork, but still. But at the same time, it sure seems that way. That every time you think about that and want to know too, that can you give me a copy of that? Can I please have a copy of what you're talking about? And so most of the time, no, it's like, yeah, if that's really all you gotta do is to verify to making sure everything is correct, but then also copies. So everything that you see right here, and I want to know too that yeah, progress has been made, but then also copies, and so every time you think about that, and I want to know too that you look at a bill a lot of times, and people might say is toward it, yeah, copies for reviews, and so every time you think about a bill though, that you want to know too that do you really need to have at least 5 or 6 or 7 page documents contain the files on which the work that you were putting together, and also a document. So let's just say that if you have an electronic PDF file document right here, and let's just say if you stamped right here, paid for right here. So it's like, yeah, paid for and then correct right here, and so yeah, so every time you think about that, and 102 is toward it that we see right here that the payment right here was a 1319 right here, and so that right there sounds just a little bit like it. That right there is supposed to be like a payment plan or something like that, like everybody else might say is toward it. Yeah, well, if you want to go ahead and come up to an agreement where you pay your half and like your fair share, or if anything, yeah, payment arrangements, right? So every time I think about that, and your warrant to where, yeah, paid in full, and so if you were to tell anybody that, yeah, you'll explain about what you were able to come up with the waiting time, and like, yeah, this right here is the amount from like, yeah, this right here, including with the like, yeah, for the paid for allowance, and like, yeah, for the gift, and so this page right here, like, yeah, talk about progress, and you talk about for the gift right here, and then I know that yeah, that's a separate document for what I was talking about from earlier. But I tell you one thing, everybody, that whenever it comes to waiting periods, and whenever it comes to waiting, and half the time you want to know too that it's all about updating, right? It's all about updates, and but still, and then graduated, but whenever you graduate, so really, whenever you do get a bill for any reason at all, for sure, it's like you probably have received a bill for a variety of things, and that's why it seems like that you get bills maybe up to maybe 47, maybe 52 pages long about all kinds of things, really. But let's just see if one of those things is going to be is as to where you go ahead and set a payment plan, and also about keeping recorded records about what all the information that's based on those bills, right? And so a lot of times it's like every time you think about that, and want to know too that every time you think about a bill, and want to know too that yeah, talk about for speak up, and then talk about for discount right here. But anyway, but I thought I'd go ahead and mention that everybody right here talk about for understanding about paid for, and thanks for watching everyone, and have a great day.